Pattern of Inheritance, presented by Dr. A. Gokulakrishnan, Assistant Professor of Biochemistry, Islamia College, Oniambadi. There are two different patterns. One is Mendelian pattern and non-Mendelian pattern. Genetics is a science of heredity. It is the branch of science dealing with the way of triads are inherited from from the parent to the offsprings. Gregor John Mendel is often called the father of genetics because he was the first person to discover how the triads are passed from the parents to the offsprings. In the late 1800s, Gregor John Mendel, an Austrian monarch and a plant breeder, conducted experiments which led to the discovery of genetics. The expressible part of a DNA, it is called as gene. An alternate form of a gene, it is called as allele. A dominant allele exerts its effects whenever present, while the recessive allele exerts its effect when in the absence of dominant allele. Genotype is the genetic makeup of an organism, while the phenotype, it is the physical appearance or observable characteristics. There are three different generations. One is parental generation, F1, offspring of the parent, and F2, first generation of the offsprings. Mendel conducted the experiment with a single triad. It is called as monohybrid experiment. For his monohybrid experiment, he selected a tall and dwarf garden pea plant, Pisum sativum. He crossed the tall plant with the dwarf plant and observed how the triads are transmitted from the progeny and calculated the percentage of tallness and dwarfness in subsequent generation. When a pure breeding tall plant was crossed with a pure breeding dwarf plant, all the plants were tall in the first filial generation. When such F1 plants were allowed to self-pollinated, both the tall and dwarf plants appeared in the second generation. This is the diagrammatic representation of monohybrid cross. The tall plant is crossed with a dwarf plant. They are all pure homozygous plants. It produces an heterozygous tall plants. When the F1 hybrids have been crossed, it results in 3 tall plants and 1 dwarf plants. It has a phenotypic ratio of 3:1, while the genotypic ratio of 1:2:1. This is the checkerboard method of calculating generations. Based on this monohybrid experiment, Mendel framed the law of dominance. The triads are controlled by two factors that can be called as dominant and recessive. A dominant triad shows if the offspring inherits at least one dominant factor from the one parent. A recessive triad shows only if the offspring inherited two recessive factors, one from each parent. Mendel's dihybrid cross experiment. Mendel also performed dihybrid cross experiment, crossing an individual plant that differed from two triads. For example, triad 1, seed structure, round versus wrinkled. Triad 2, seed color, yellow versus green. A typical dihybrid cross usually results in a 9:3:3:1 phenotypic ratios in the offsprings. In this case, 9/16 of the offsprings are dominant for both the triads, while 3/16 of the offsprings are dominant for one triad and recessive for the other, and 1/16 of the offsprings are recessive for both the triads. This is a Punnett squares for dihybrid cross experiments. Based on this experiment, he framed a law of segregation and law of independent assortment. Two alleles of each genes are packed into a separate gametes. The alleles move apart during meiosis and occurs during meiosis 1 or metaphase. The homologous chromosomes move towards opposite pole at the end of the poles. The segregation of alleles law of independent assortment. The segregation of alleles of one gene does not influence the alleles of for the another. The allele are randomly packed in the gametes. There is a two important cross called as back cross and test cross. A cross between the F1 hybrids with the either of the homozygous parent, it is called as back cross. If we cross with the homozygous dominant parent, it will result to 100% of dominant characters, while if it is crossed with homozygous dwarf plant, it will leads to 50% of plant tall and 50% of dwarf. Back cross is very significant. As it can be helpful to the farmers or the plant breeders to design the breeding as per the demand. For example, if purple flowers are more in demand, then the breeder should try to cross F1 hybrid with the dominant parent. If the white flower are also in demand, then the breeder should cross the F1 hybrid with the recessive parent. Non-Mendelian genetics. Mendelian genetics describes the inheritance of pattern based on complete dominance or recessiveness. There are other types of inheritance that Mendel never considered, that is incomplete dominance, codominance, multiple alleles, polygenic trials, and sex-linked inheritance. Incomplete dominance. A red flower plant, when it is crossed with white flower plant, if it in the F1 hybrids, it appears to be red. Instead of appearing red, it appears pink in color. This is due to the incomplete dominance. The incomplete dominance inheritance problem. What is the probability of pink color flowers if the pink flowers are bred with red flowers? 50% chances of pink flowers. Codominance. Both the traits are dominant and show up in the phenotypic together. Co means together. A black and white cow, when they cross, they produces a white cow spotted with black spots. What are all the possible phenotypes when the two spotted cows are bred? When the same two spotted cows are bred, it produces a black cow and spotted cow and a white cows. Human blood group type displays both codominance and complete dominance. Red blood cells can either have a carbohydrate on the surface or not. Based on this, the presence of a carbohydrate is dominant to the absence of carbohydrate. Additionally, there are two types of carbohydrates that may exist on the surface of RBC called as IA and IB. The cell surface carbohydrate A and B are codominant, which means they could exist side by side. If a woman multiple alleles, when more than two varieties exist in a trait, many animals have a variety of coat colors. This is the multiple alleles. Polygenic traits require more than one gene or allele to determine the trait. The skin tone is determined by 4 to 6 genes. That means there may be 6 different chromosomes involved. 6 linked inheritance. The genes for some traits are found on the sex chromosome X or Y. Most of the traits are recessive. The normal gene is dominant. Heterozygous female are carriers. They don't show the trait, but they carry a gene for the trait. Homozygous female have the trait. Male with the gene XY have the trait. They do not have another X to counterbalance the affected gene. Color blindness is a sex-linked inheritance. Color blindness is a sex-linked inheritance. The gene for this trait, it is inherited through X chromosomes.